Hi, I'm Libuza, a freelance teacher in academic writing. Welcome to this lecture on stylish academic writing. This lecture is about the work of Helen Sword, a professor for research in higher education. Originally a literary scholar, she is also an expert in academic writing. She wrote several books on the topic, among which Stylish Academic Writing. And she also gives talks and workshops all over the world. In a talk she gave at Harvard University a couple of years ago, she tells the audience how her interest in researching academic writing was caught. Most articles in her own research field were not reader-friendly at all. She says, "They seem to be researchers trying to impress other researchers with their jargon, with their language, and with their methodology." So she decided to do a little bit of empirical research on this point. She asked colleagues from all kinds of research disciplines. What are the characteristics of well-written papers? And what makes a paper engaging and a pleasure to read? Think for a moment and perhaps even pause the video for a minute. What would be your answer? She comprised the answers she received into a list of 10 things that a stylish academic writer usually does, such as having an engaging title, using lots of examples, having a storyline. She then rated 100 papers from 6 research journals, and the results were quite shocking. The mean score was 1.1. The median score was 0. More than half did none of these 10 things that a stylish academic writer usually does. So, nobody writes the kind of texts they say they would like to read. And she asked herself, now why is that? This made her broaden her research, and she rated even more papers, hundreds of papers more, which resulted in the following figure. The results are specified for different disciplines. Medicine and biology are the top rows. And if you want, you can pause the video now and take a better look. She also wrote a book based on this research called Stylish Academic Writing. Her book is based on 11 elements of stylish academic writing, and each element forms a chapter. So let's take a look at those. The first one is using personal pronouns and language. This means writing in a personal voice, so using I and we, instead of this article describes, or here it is demonstrated, or it can be shown. Researchers often feel they can't use the first person because they are supposed to sound objective and authoritative. But Helen Sword, and I also, would argue that it is much more scientific, more correct, to be clear about who did what. Although the impersonal passive voice is sometimes a great choice. For example, it can be a great tool to maintain cohesion. But writing in a personal style makes your sentences more energetic and easier to understand. Number 2 is using concrete language. Basically, Helen Sword wants to get rid of the assumption that abstract thought demands abstract language. Compare these 2 sentences from 2 different papers, but from the same journal. Although standard statistical methods are available for incorporating measurement error and other sources of variation, they are not commonly applied, and they have rarely been considered in the context of phylogenetic statistics. Insects suck, chew, parasitize, bore, store, and even cultivate their food to a high degree of specialization. The authors of the first sentence use abstract verbs, apply, consider, and the passive voice, which results in a sentence in which we don't really see who is doing all this applying and considering. The authors in the second sentence, however, hook us in straight away with a concrete noun, insects, and with lots of concrete verbs, suck, chew. We can immediately see and understand what is happening. The third element is using engaging titles. Helen Sword advises us to find a title that is both engaging and informative. For example, try to incorporate a concrete image. Or use a surprising juxtaposition. Or use a pun or wordplay in your title. Of course, this kind of title may not be appropriate for every paper or every journal. Number 4 is writing an effective and engaging first paragraph. This does not mean that it needs to be flashy, gimmicky, or controversial. It simply means that you trigger the reader to keep on reading. So, for example, you could start with a story, an anecdote, a quotation, a surprising fact, or a challenging question to invoke the interest of the reader. For an engaging paper, it is also important to tell your readers a story. So instead of listing isolated facts and actions without a motive, deliver the reader a clear narrative that moves from A to B. The sixth element Helen Sword mentions is using lots of examples. This is a great way to ground abstract ideas in the real world. However, not every subject or discipline lends itself to using examples. So I advise you to look out for opportunities to use them, but don't force it. Another element that I want to challenge is her advice on the use of jargon. Helen Sword warns us and basically tells us to use as little jargon as possible. However, jargon is very practical because it allows researchers to communicate effectively. So don't avoid using jargon, but reflect and ask yourself why you use it. Is it because it's the most efficient way of expressing an idea? Or is it because you want to impress your reader? Element number 8 is using non-standard structure. Take a look at the following outline of a paper. Only the title tells us something about the topic. The section headings, the structure, are purely methodical and signal only the storyline. This example tells us much more about the contents of the paper. It uses a mixture of standard or methodical structure, so introduction, conclusion, and it also uses non-standard or thematical structure. Perhaps inserting thematic headings into your standard structure will also work for your paper. You probably recognize this because we see it more and more often in the results or discussion section. A stylish academic writer is also thoughtful in using citations. Pay attention to the amount and length of your citations and footnotes, as well as the placement. The goal here is to acknowledge other people's work without it interrupting the flow of your paper. By the way, in biomedical papers, citations are hardly used. Number 10 is having a concrete abstract. If you want your abstract to be effective, strive to express complex ideas clearly. Helen Sword has a great exercise to help you write your abstract. Do an elevator pitch. Think of how you would condense your complex research into only 1 or 2 minutes of explaining. You only have until the elevator doors open. And finally, the 11th element is creative expression. What Helen Sword means by this is show the reader that you are passionate and committed about your research. Don't fear creativity and originality if this helps you in telling the reader why your research is so exciting. To help you become a stylish academic writer, she also created an online tool to test your own writing, the Writer's Diet. The tool is based on 5 word categories that you should avoid. You simply submit your text and it automatically highlights these words. The first one of the categories is be verbs, forms of the infinitive to be. She advises to use strong action verbs rather than semantically weak and vague verbs. Number 2. Avoid using zombie nouns or nominalizations and instead use concrete language and concrete images. The third category is prepositions. Avoid using long strings of prepositional phrases and also vary your prepositions. Number 4, add words. These are adverbs and academic adjectives with suffixes such as able, and, airy, full. Again, she urges us to use concrete nouns and active verbs rather than these adwords. In this example, these highlighted adwords make the sentence monotonous and forgettable. Number 5 is the use of pronouns like it, this, that, there. Use these pronouns only when you can state exactly which noun they refer to. I do want to warn you a little. This test is very strict. If you put your text to the test, please don't get discouraged if you see half of your text highlighted and labeled flabby or causing a heart attack. Don't pay attention to the score, but focus on the possibilities to improve. Helen Sword herself also writes, "You are encouraged to follow these principles thoughtfully and consistently rather than rigidly and without exception." And that concludes this lecture. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you feel inspired and I wish you happy writing.